Hi, everybody. Welcome to our study group. This is actually the first study group we've ever done on the AWS Certified Security Specialty. So I'm really excited to see that we've got a lot of interest in this. We've had a ton of signups over the last couple of days. We have about 50 people here who have already joined. So I think this is going to be a really fun session, and it's going to be a not overly structured session or series of sessions. So Roy and I are just going to sit down and we're going to share our experiences with the exam. We're going to share just as much as we can to help you prepare for the real thing and hopefully pass it. But I just want to welcome everybody and thank them for joining. We're going to get started by talking about a few frequently asked questions, and we've also got some questions that have rolled in already. So I'll get started by addressing some of them. But the first one that we always get, and one of the most important ones, is: are these sessions going to be recorded? The answer is yes, these are recorded sessions, and we will send them out via email. I say about 24 hours just to give a realistic expectation. It might be a little bit more than that, but keep in mind, it won't be sent out immediately after. We have to process the recording. We have to get everything set up. And so we will be sending them to the email that you registered with for these sessions. And we'll also be sending the slideshows. So the slides that you're currently looking at here have a lot of information in them. They're going to have a bunch of links. They're very ugly, long links. And so it makes it hard to be able to go to them unless you can click on that. And so that's why we send out these slides with the recording afterwards. Again, give me about a day, potentially up to 2 days, but at least a day for sending these out. Also, if you've never used this webinar software before, you have the ability to ask questions. So there should be a Q&A tab. You can go in there, you can ask your question, and then Roy and myself will be able to see them. And so it creates a bit of a backlog. We'll either respond to the questions right away if it's very relevant to what we're talking about in the moment. But if it's not super duper relevant, or if we're going to answer it later on, then we will hold the questions until the very end, and then we'll go ahead and answer them. So if you feel like we're ignoring your question, trust me, we are not ignoring you. We're probably just holding off for a little bit. Oh, before I move on to talking about today's session, I did want to address a quick question that we had here, actually, because it's important. So I'm going to project it so everybody can see it.
Yeah, it's been on there twice, actually.
Yeah, so the question is, do we have to register again for the upcoming sessions? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. I know that's a little bit annoying, but it's just the way that the software works, because otherwise it won't properly invite you to the next sessions. So what I'll do is, now that I have your email in our system, I'm not going to use that email to spam you. I promise. I hate when people do that. I'm just going to use it to send you helpful information, including to tell you, hey, here's the new registration link. Here's the new form. It's always going to be on the same page, that same page that you used to register for today's session. I'm just going to have to change that form out each time. So apologies for the extra steps. I know it's a little bit annoying, but I'm just dealing with the software restrictions. So short answer, yes, you have to re-register for every single session, and I'll send you some reminders so that you don't forget to do that. Thank you for the question. That's a really good one. Okay. But back to what we'll be talking about today. So we've got quite a bit to cover, and we're going to be doing it for the next about hour and a half. But we're going to start off with introductions. So I'll share a little bit about who I am, and then I'll hand the mic over to Roy, and he'll share more information about himself and his background. And then also Roy and I will be talking about the session events. So we'll be talking about, like, in today's session, here's what we're going to cover. In the next session, here's what we'll cover, and so on. They'll be fairly similar, so there's not going to be a whole lot of difference, but we do have some pretty cool stuff coming up. So each session will have a little bit of a variance, to help you prepare for the exam. We'll also talk about who this is for and who it's not for, just to make sure that everybody who's attending today is in the right place, in the right spot, just because we don't want to leave anybody behind, or give you wrong impressions of what we'll be covering and what the certification exam covers as well. We'll be talking about what the exam covers. So we'll talk about the domains that you can expect to see in the exam, the weight of each domain. We'll also talk about what services might be covered in this exam, the types of questions you can expect, things like that. Then we'll share a bunch of helpful free resources. Roy and I have gone out and we've collected a bunch of links. So we share those links in this slide, and they're just things that will help you prepare for the exam. And all of them are 100% free. And then we'll start to wrap up this session by going through 2 practice exam questions. So one thing I want to make super clear is we want this to be very practical. It's not just going to be conceptual. It's not just here sitting up and teaching a bunch of different topics. Instead, we're going to give you actual practice exam questions that Roy and I are both co-creating together based on our experiences of sitting through the real thing. So these exams questions obviously don't break NDA. You have to sign an NDA for the exam, so they're not the exact questions you'll see, but they get as close as possible without breaking that NDA. So we want this to be super, super practical for you. And then we'll just wrap up with some last minute notes and last minute items. Anything else you want to add to this to the agenda, Roy? Or
No, I just obviously I want to say that I'll be a student as well as you guys on the call, so I'm actually going to be learning and taking the exam along with you guys. So from here on in, I'll be following the same path as you. And sitting the exam in between a couple of, well, we'll explain in a minute, but sitting the exam in between a couple of the session 2 and 3. So I'll be kind of feeding back after that as well.
So on that note, let's dive into introductions really quickly. So hi, I'm Christoph Limplair. If we haven't met before, it's very nice to meet you, and thank you for being here today. I'm the founder and a trainer at cybr.com. It's mirrored on my screen, so I'm like, wait, which side of my shirt is it on? I have 8+ years of AWS experience, and at Cyber we focus on AWS security training. So if you're trying to upskill or reskill in AWS security, we can help you with that through courses and hands-on labs. And I use my 8+ years of AWS experience to create this training material. I've also helped tens of thousands of individuals like yourself get AWS certified over those past 8 to 9 years. I don't know if anybody here remembers Linux Academy. That's actually how I met Roy, but I was one of the first members at Linux Academy, and that was a whole lot of fun. And that's where I created a lot of AWS certification prep material and helped a lot of people get certified. And so I hope that you will be one of those people in the near future here. My background is primarily in web development and AWS Cloud. So I actually got started in web development. You don't necessarily need to have a background in web development to get very good at AWS. That was just my chosen path. That's just kind of how things ended up happening. But having experience in web development is absolutely not a requirement. You don't even necessarily need to be a programmer to succeed in AWS. Everybody has a slightly different path. So that's something to keep in mind, and a really important point I like to point out. Otherwise, just a quick tip about or fact about me. I live in Colorado and I love hiking and skiing. So if you're in the area, I would love to connect and meet up, maybe grab a coffee or go on a quick hike, or if it's the right season, go skiing. But that's it. Oh, no, that's not it, actually. I forgot I
That's
added
not
another slide.
yeah.
Yeah. I usually I don't have this slide in here, so I totally forgot. But yes, I am AWS Security Specialty Certified. So I did pass the certification exam back in, I believe it was April of this year. So it's been a couple of months. It's been enough time to where I've been able to sit down and digest what the exam was like, but it's also still recent enough to where I haven't forgotten everything that was going on the actual exam. But as Roy mentioned, and as I'm sure he'll talk about again, he is about to take his exam here in the next roughly a month or so. I think it's what, 3 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, 3 weeks.
So it's you've got my experience where I took it a couple months ago, and then we're about to have Roy's experience where he's about to take it. And so we'll combine those two experiences to share our experience with you and share our tips and tricks as a result of that. Okay, now that's it. Now it's your turn.
Thanks, Christoph. So, hi everyone. I'm Roy, founder of Sky Purple Cloud, which is a UK-based cloud services company. We specialize in cloud security for our customers. We niche in the life sciences biotech area, so we tend to kind of focus on those kind of pharma, biotech, drug discovery, research type companies. I've been working in cloud for over 7 years now, predominantly AWS, but also Google Cloud as well. My background before that was about too many years to remember now, but 30 years in like the healthcare and life sciences. I used to work for Vertex Pharmaceuticals, which is a major pharmaceutical company. Worked there for about 20 years and then moved, all in on cloud. I've got various different certifications, one of those being the Cloud Certified Security Professional, which is the ISC squared qualification, the company that does the CISSP, but this is like the cloud specific version of that. So there's a lot of content that I hope is relevant to the security specialty from that as well. Also, AWS Solution Architect Professional, and just recently, about 2-3 weeks ago, I think, Google Cloud Solution Architect, what do they call it? Cloud Architect Professional as well. So, working across various different cloud platforms with and using all those years of kind of solution architect experience for that. I'm also Aviatrix multi-cloud networking professional as well. I don't know if you're aware of Aviatrix, but they're big on the multi-cloud networking across all major cloud platforms. Also a security professional in that, as well as a networking professional. And as you can see from the slide there, I'm a keen surfer, believe it or not, in the cold water of the Atlantic, which is kind of the southwest coast of the UK. So you'll find me down there, like mostly in the summer, but sometimes later into the year. And here, I think we've got a slide. Yeah, so here's some of my certifications, and you can see that I don't have the security specialty, but I do have a bunch of other professional qualifications from various cloud platforms, and also FinOps certified as well. We do a lot of cloud cost optimization work as well.
Probably should have mentioned too, I didn't add them on my slides because most of them are expired by now, but I have sat through multiple other AWS certifications as well, like the certified developer, SysOps, DevOps professional, stuff like that. I just didn't put them on there because technically they're expired. So technically I'm not still certified in those, but I have taken multiple different AWS certifications. And so that was also helpful in preparing for this, but you don't necessarily have to take a dozen of them to be ready for this specific certification exam. So Roy, we actually had a question, and then we'll move on to the next slide here in a second.
Yeah,
But
just to say, I mean, it is
yeah,
quite important if you've already done any of the cloud certifications, both the Google ones and the AWS ones. They're very similar in question format. So I think if you've done and sat any of these qualifications, all useful experience for when you go into an exam and see that exam question format, because sometimes it can throw you if it's your first exam and you go in there and it's all these long worded questions, and it's quite difficult sometimes to kind of just get your head around it, because none of the practice exams, because you're not allowed to copy the content directly, none of the practice exams I've ever done really match the quality of the questions in the exam.
and if maybe also, because I've taken some CompTIA exams as well, so if you've taken other non-AWS certification exams before, they're quite different, right? It's a different format of question and answer. Even if it's multiple choice, you would think there's not that many ways you could do multiple choice, but each provider has a little bit of a difference when it comes to how they word the questions and how they word the potential answers as well. But Roy, we had a question come through for you, which was, and as we're answering this question, I'm going to send out a poll to everybody, if you don't mind answering, just so we know what your current experience level is. That would be helpful. But the question to you was, have you been preparing for long, or have you just started preparing for this exam?
What a great question. Right. I've been preparing all my life. So I did the cloud certified security professional, which is the IC squared exam. I did that probably about 4 years ago now. And the benefit of that one is not like the AWS ones where you have to recertify. To kind of continue the CCSP, you have to just kind of keep just doing like sessions and seminars, and just add them as kind of sat content that you add to your account. And every 2 years it refreshes that. As long as you've passed enough credits on that, you get to retain the certification. But that's really where I started getting to the security side. We're also, as a company, Sky Purple Cloud is also an Orca security partner for the UK. So we do a lot of cloud security posture management as well. So although I haven't really been studying for the security specialty, I've done about a week's training. I started out on an A Cloud Guru course some time ago. Didn't get very far with that, but I've done probably about a week's training with that. And then obviously now I'm going to kind of, along with everybody that's joining us on this study group, going to be kind of studying along the same pace as you.
All right, so as we're getting answers to the poll here, which is very helpful, by the way, and we'll address that in just a few slides, but let's talk about the sessions. Let's talk about what we're going to be covering, not only in today's session, but then the next 3 other sessions as well, if you want to get started with that, Roy.
Yeah, so obviously this first session that we're on is the intros. We'll be talking about the sessions as we're doing now, and the exam structure. As Christoph mentioned earlier, we've got a couple of practice exam questions to give you a flavour of what the question structure is like. The second session will be predominantly multiple choice practice questions. We will obviously have time for Q&A during that as well, but the majority of that will probably be taken up with practice questions. Now, in between the second and third sessions, I'm going to be taking my exam. I haven't booked it yet, but it will be sometime between then, either late July or early August. And then hopefully I'll come out of that and passed. Fingers crossed, right? Whichever way it goes. Anyway, I will give like an up-to-date update of like the domains that were covered in my exam, the kind of questions that came up, the areas that either I was kind of surprised by because it wasn't content I kind of thought would come up, or just a standard, this always comes up, and there were a lot of questions on this domain, for example. And then I'll also give a summary of kind of what I didn't know, and some of the areas that I think we should maybe focus on for the third and fourth session. And then obviously we'll have some more practice questions during that, and then the final session on the August the 28th will be more practice questions and just a quick review of the exam content before you go into your exam, presuming that you're going to take it sometime after the August the 28th, just to give you time to do the whole study group and then book the exam.
And I would add to that, obviously, as you can see here, that first session, the session we're doing today, is a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit more, I'll say, slide heavy, just because we're presenting the study group. We're giving you that information you need up front, like those free resources, things like that. The next sessions are going to be quite a bit more focused on actual practical exams questions, excuse me. And so like we will sit down and we'll have maybe, I don't know, 4 to 5 questions that we'll sit through, and we'll really digest what those questions are. And we'll make sure that everybody understands the correct answer, why it's the correct answer. We even pull up the AWS console here and there and demonstrate like, hey, this is why these other questions don't work, or like we'll really get hands-on and try to answer those questions as best as we can. So the other sessions will be quite a bit more practical, I would say.
And I think one of the other things I think we should add to this, which isn't on here, Christoph, is maybe we should suggest some of the domains that people should be learning along the way, just so it gives them kind of some homework to go away and do.
That's not a bad idea. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tricky because I guess we haven't discussed this yet, Roy, but maybe what we could do is we could try to create the exams. Although there's only going to be 3 other sessions after this, and there's like 6 domains. So I don't know that we can necessarily do it that way. But in the future, maybe we could try to do like questions per domain and separate it out that way. But we can figure that out afterwards. We can talk about it. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we move on to the next slide?
No, that's fine for now. Yeah.
Cool. Let's do it. Okay. So who is this for? And that's why I wanted to run this poll, just to see if we have the right people in the conversation today. And I think for the most part we do, right? We have a lot of people that are responding that they have some AWS experience, but maybe they need some help studying. And so that's why they're here. We've got a few people who already have the experience and they're ready to take the exam. That's great. Still glad to have you here. Appreciate you taking time to be here. Hopefully, as you take the exam, you can come back and share your experience with us, and we can share that with the crowd as well. But Roy, let's sit down here for a couple minutes and let's talk about who should be in this conversation, who this certification exam is for, and just as importantly, maybe who it's not for. Maybe we have some people in the audience who aren't quite ready to take the certification exam yet, and they're still welcome to join us. Of course, everybody's welcome, but maybe we can set some realistic expectations here and help make sure that everybody is in the right place.
Yeah, so the recommended kind of scope for this from AWS is to have at least 5 years of IT security experience, either designing and implementing security solutions or maintaining them, and 2 or more years hands-on experience, kind of working within solution deployment, securing those AWS workloads, and working quite closely from a security perspective. You don't necessarily have to be a security specialist to actually do this, but you need to at least have security as part of your role within the organization you're working for. And it covers a bunch of different job roles, as it mentions here on this slide, cloud architecture, database, DBAs, networking specialists, and a lot of DevSecOps now.
And I know why they list the years of experience for all certification exams like this. I don't love that metric because
Mm.
people learn at different paces, right? Somebody with 3 years might know more than somebody with 5 years, depending on how quickly they learn with their prior experiences and so on. So that 5 years, I would say, is a loose 5 years. It really just depends on your background, your experience, etc. But I think they put that in there just to set realistic expectations. If you have
Hmm.
no AWS or AWS security experience, this is probably not the certification you should start with, just being completely honest. I would start with something like, if you have no IT experience, the AWS Cloud Practitioner. If you have AWS or IT experience, you can start with the Certified Solutions Architect one, or something like the Certified Developer. I would start with the associate level certifications because the specialty level are more difficult than the associate level exams. So I wouldn't just jump into the fire and try to go straight to specialty ones or even professional ones. So that would be
Yeah,
my 2 cents on that.
yeah. I mean, I do have another comment on that. That if you've ever sat any of these exams, you'll realize that there's probably 60 to 70% of the questions that you can answer from just doing studying, and then there'll be 30% of those questions that you will need to have had hands-on experience to understand a lot of the question content and the scope of it. So I've sat in, I mean, my first solution architect, which was like 7 years ago, my solution architect associate, um, I had about 6 months of AWS experience at that point, and there were questions that I could kind of guess from the content, but I didn't really know at that point in time because I hadn't, worked with the AWS platform enough.
That we added, so we took these screenshots, I should have mentioned as context, from the AWS website. If you go to that page dedicated to the certification exam, they have these FAQ sections. So we just grab screenshots of that. You can always cross-reference there. But they also had this section here, Roy, that talks about how will this certification help my career. I could go on a tangent for this, so I'm going to try to keep this really, really short. My 2 cents about certifications and how they help with career. But overall, I always like to say that when it comes to certification exams, it's actually not about the certification, that piece of paper you get. That piece of paper itself, in my humble opinion, is almost worthless. What actually matters, where the value is in certifications, is the journey you take to get the certification. What does that mean? That means that for a certification to really help your career in the long term, don't just memory dump. Don't just memorize, try to find quote unquote exam dumps. Memorize that, go sit the exam. And even if you pass using that method, which is a big if, but even if you do, you're going to forget 90% of it. That's not helping your career whatsoever in the long term. You won't be able to do the job. You will really struggle even if you end up getting a job from it. Instead, if you're doing the hands-on that Roy was just talking about, if you're getting that experience while you're preparing for the certification exam, and that's how you end up passing it because you have that experience, that will compound over many, many years because now you actually know how to do it. You know how to use AWS securely. You know how to implement it for organizations, and they will pay you for that knowledge and that experience and skill set. So again, I could talk about this for hours. Like we could do an entire session dedicated to this topic, but I'm pretty sure everybody here already probably understands that because they're at a certain level with AWS already. But do you have anything else to add to that, Roy?
No, I just emphasize that. I think it's really important to get hands-on. If there's labs that you can do and things like that, they're really important to get hands-on.
Okay, and then we've got a couple other things to answer this question here. I'll just go ahead and put them both on the screen so we can just talk about them briefly. The first one is, what certifications should I earn before taking this exam? And the second one is, what certifications should I earn after attaining this certification? What would you say to that?
So I think, as you mentioned, I think you've already mentioned the fact that it's important, I think, to have at least an associate level qualification before this. I think, I mean, we just talked about it, right? The hands-on experience is more important, but it's good to have that experience of taking one of the associate level exams. I think there's a couple that would provide some decent kind of background for this, which is the the DevOps associate one. I think it's called, is it developer associate? Um, and the potentially the solution architect associate as well. They're kind of quite good courses to kind of get your feet wet with some of the exams. After this, I think it depends on what your career path is. If you haven't got the solution architect professional, I would kind of recommend kind of getting that to tie that in with the specialties. The path that I see a lot of people following is associate, professional, and then the specialty stuff. So I think that's important. If you haven't got the professional, then maybe after the specialty, consider the professional. But that scope of that is a lot greater. The solution architect professional is a huge scope, especially with all the services that AWS are adding now. But yeah, I mean, they're like the one that I've got, the CCSP, the IC squared. I mean, if you're going into a security domain, security specialty, then it might be worth considering either the CCSP or the CISSP. That's quite an important and, you know, well-regarded certification in the industry.
And we actually had somebody ask whether it, like, if they come from an Azure certified background, they're asking if to pass this specific certification here, whether they should go past the CISSP first and then come back and take this one. To answer that, I would say no, you don't have to do that. You can absolutely do that. There's nothing wrong with that path, but you don't. I would not say that the CISSP is a prerequisite for the AWS security specialty. They cover very different types of domains, and actually that's the next slide. So let me switch over to that so we can talk about what this
Yeah,
exam actually
I
covers.
think the CISSP is obviously a lot greater in cybersecurity content. It's not just about cloud security, which is why I did the CCSP rather than CISSP, because the CCSP is geared towards cloud security specifically, and it's all of the content, all the cloud related content from the CISSP. And so from my role and my kind of my career progression, that was much more important to me than the CISSP. However, if you're going into like a more kind of high level security role, there might be a requirement to have the CISSP full part of that role.
Because as we can see here on this slide, this exam has 6 different domains. But as we're listing out these domains, remember that this is specific to Amazon Web Services. So when we say domain 1 is about threat detection and incident response, we're not talking about threat detection and incident response for on-prem, for Azure or Google Cloud. We're talking strictly for AWS. How do we do this using AWS native security services? Same thing with domain 2, which is about security logging and monitoring. Domain 3 about infrastructure security. Domain 4 about identity and access management. Then 5 is about data protection. And then finally 6 is about management and security governance. I like to show these domains because they give you that high level overview of here's what the exam covers. Here's what I can expect to see on the exam. But also next to those domains, they give us an indication of how much of the content you can expect in the exam will be about that domain. So for example, for domain number 1, that's going to be scored at about 14% of the exam versus domain 2 is 18%, then 20%, 16%, 18%, 14%. So in this specific exam, like I've taken some exams where there's quite a bit of variance between domains of how much they contribute to your overall score. In this case, I would say they're relatively fairly balanced. You've got some that are lower than others, 14% versus 20%. But overall, this is a pretty fairly balanced exam when it comes to the different domains. And I say that because I've talked to people, they try to strategize like, oh, I'll spend more time focusing on the top 3 domains, and then I don't care as much about the other 3. In this case, you can't really do that. You really have to focus on learning stuff about each of them in order to successfully pass. Because if you don't study domain 1 at all, then you'll miss out on 14% of the scored content, which is a pretty hefty chunk. Let's see what else to mention about that. To me, there's not a
Yeah,
whole
so
lot. Yeah, go ahead.
I think some of the I think some of the questions on all AWS exams, I think they just put in there for their own internal scoring. So there will be some questions on the exam. I think it's always the case with all of the AWS exams. I think this is this one included, is that some of the questions are in there and aren't scored. They're just for internal scoring by AWS. So just bear that in mind, that, although you may feel kind of like you didn't get as many as you thought right, and pass as and do as well as you thought you would, some of those questions might not be scored, so you might still pass.
There was one I'm fairly certain on my exam that I'm fairly certain was that. They don't tell you and they don't show you
Mm.
in the results once you get your results. They don't give you a breakdown and say, "Hey, this question was not actually weighted." But you're right. They will throw in some wild card questions sometimes in your version that are testing to see how you do, right? They do data collection that way. So if you come across a question and you're like, I don't know about this. This does not seem relevant or that relevant to this exam, that might be the case. Don't worry. Don't let it throw you off. Yeah, just keep doing, keep taking your exam, and you'll probably do just fine. That's a good point to add. I forgot to mention that. But apart from that, just looking at domains like this is not super helpful. Just kind of gives you that high level overview. So let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about things like the types of services that you can expect to see questions about on the exam. To help with this, I've created 2 different cheat sheets. They're completely free to download. You can download them from that URL. Again, I'll be sending out these slides in the next day or so you'll be able to click on them if you don't feel like typing this out, but I tried to make them really short links. The first one is a cheat sheet specifically about here's the types of AWS security or non-security services that you can definitely expect to see on your exam. So if they're on that cheat sheet, I would be at least somewhat familiar with what that exam does. You don't necessarily have to deep dive in every single one of them, but if, for example, we have AWS Cloud HSM, AWS Audit Manager, if you see a question on the exam that asks you, hey, what does AWS Audit Manager do? You should be able to answer that. So hopefully that cheat sheet can help you with that. If you want to take a quick screenshot as I'm about to go over to the next one, because we've got 2. So the next one is going to be more of a general cheat sheet. It's not so much about this exam, but it's about the AWS native security services that are broken down by category. So when it comes to identity and access management, bam, here are services you should know about. When it comes to network and application protection, here's the services you need to know about. So that's the second cheat sheet I would recommend that you download. And again, familiarize yourself with every single service that's on there so that you can at least say in a nutshell, here's what Macy does, here's what KMS does, here's what the web application firewall does, things like that. Be familiar with
Just a
them.
quick question on that,
Mhm.
Christoph. So I noticed you've got some like slightly newer services on this cheat sheet, like verified access. Did you see anything like that come up in your exam around verified access?
Oh, and again, that's why I really want to emphasize this second cheat sheet is not so much built for this certification exam. I just added it in
Hmm.
here because you should still know about it. But that's a very good point because if it's a brand new service, like they just launched, I forget the name of it. They literally just launched this AI service that helps you build applications just by typing in "build me this application." Do you know what I'm talking about? What's the name of that
Big
service?
Rock.
It's not, I'm not talking about Bedrock, but that's another good one.
Party Rock.
No, hold on. What is the?
It
Let
was
me pull
Party
up.
Rock. Yeah, it was Party Rock. They
No, no, no,
announced
no,
it
no.
like.
Hold on. I swear it's a different name.
Uh,
The App Studio, AWS App Studio. They
oh,
just
okay.
launched
I thought you
this.
meant the Party Rock thing they announced that just builds an AI app for you from through the browser.
I feel like they keep building more of those types of services, but just naming them a little bit differently. So I'm having a hard time keeping up with what's going on. But if you have that type of service that was just launched last week or yesterday, it's not going to be on your exam. You don't have to know it in depth. You should still know that it exists. That's just good knowledge to have. But trust me, they did not just launch the service and immediately add it to your certification exam. So don't stress out. It will not be on there. That's a really good point to add. Okay, so next, let's talk about a few more helpful free resources. I'll start with a few, and then Roy, if you want to take over and explain some of the other ones that you added to this list. The first 3 are cyber-specific resources. That very first one is a certification prep course that I'm actively working on. I'm putting out the content for it completely free. The only stuff that won't be free is stuff like hands-on labs, some extra scenarios, practice exams, and all that. But the lessons themselves are going to be free. All you have to do is just sign up for one of our free accounts. So if you're interested in that, click on it. It's a work in progress. It's going to take me a few months to complete it. So please have patience, but hopefully it helps a little bit with your journey of studying. The second one is going to be even more AWS security cheat sheets. So I shared two already, but I've got dozens and dozens of AWS security cheat sheets. They're not all specific to this exam. They're just about AWS security in general. So still good information to have, and they're completely free. And then that third one is going to be Cyber's Discord. So we have a Cyber Discord community of over 2,000 members, and a lot of them are AWS professionals or people getting started in AWS security. Great place to go in, ask questions, share resources like this. I'll probably even end up creating a channel dedicated to this the AWS certified security specialty so that we can just go in and converse about it. I'm also on there, so you can DM me directly. And I can't remember if Roy is on there as well, but if he is, feel free to nudge him. Feel free to DM him as well. But do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the other links that we have in there that are official AWS links?
Yeah, so the fourth one on this list here is the official exam guide, and now I think we'll be going through that on the final session in more detail. But just take a look at that, see what the content is. This is the official AWS exam guide. Really important to just check out as many specific AWS provided resources as you can. All of this, majority of I say most of these links, most of the links and the content from AWS is free. At least the kind of the guides and stuff. I'll go on to what isn't free in a minute, but the skill builder stuff, the official practice exam questions. There are some exam questions that are free. If you have a skill builder account, like a monthly subscription to skill builder, there's a lot of content there, a lot of content that's really useful for this specific security specialty exam. There's practice exam questions, there's training courses, supplement what Christoph's provided for you. And so I'd say just check that out and take a look at some of those exam questions if you have a skill build session. If you don't, there are some other exam questions. Maybe we'll try and find some other links to some other kind of reputable providers of exam questions. But what I will say is the official practice exams from AWS are a lot closer to the final exams.
And we had a question come through very relevant to this, which is asking, this person's been going through multiple different types of practice exam questions, maybe from different providers like that. And they're saying that they found out that there were multiple approaches to answering a question. So how do you go about learning that skill? The first answer I would give is by coming to these study groups, because we're going to be giving you or showing you multiple different types of questions, and we'll walk you through at least, I'll say, here's how I would break down this question. Here's how I would break down these answers. And if I'm sitting in the exam, this is my thought process. So you get to see how I do it. But I guarantee you, Roy's going to do it a little bit differently than I am. And everybody's unique in that way. And I'm not the best test taker. I should probably mention that. I don't score very high on exams. It doesn't matter if I have 10 years of experience or not. I don't do well, especially when it's a multiple choice type of exam. I have a hard time sitting there for 3 hours, and this exam is 3 hours long. Now, it didn't take me the full 3 hours. I think it took me maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. But for somebody like me, that's still very, very hard to sit in and stay focused. And so I'll try to share some of those tips and things that I do to really help me through that, not only in today's session, but also in other sessions as well. Anything you want to add to that, Roy?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I think I like to a lot of the exam centers will let you have like a wipeable slate to write notes on. I think it's really important because the questions are so wordy, and for non-English speakers, non-native English speakers, it can be more difficult to interpret them. What I would say is pull out the relevant keywords. If you've got something to write the notes on, just write them down on kind of your wipeable slate or your notepad, depending on what you're allowed to take into the exam, and just kind of pull out the relevant pieces. And before you even look at the answers or focus on the answers, work out in your head what you think the answer is going to be. And then you go to the questions and determine which of the ones closely matches what you think the answer should be. And be very careful, because there's always going to be two which are very similar, or in my experience, nearly every question you've got two that are quite similar. So you need to make sure you read the answers very, very carefully. The other thing is, if you don't know the answer, just eliminate the ones that are stupid, right? There's always some answers in there that are stupid and don't make any sense whatsoever. There'll be services mentioned that don't exist. There'll be, configurations that are so complicated that just nobody would do it. So from that perspective, that helps sometimes if you don't know the answer, just to eliminate maybe 2 of the wrong answers.
I'm going to move over to the next slide as we go into the next section of this study group, which is going to be the actual practice exam questions. But before I pull up the first practice exam question, let's do a couple things. One, let's keep talking about some exam taking tips. I think that's going to be really helpful. And I don't want to forget the ones that popped into my head just now. But 2, I'm going to put in a second poll. And the second poll is just asking you when you plan on taking this certification exam. So if you don't mind answering that really quickly. And as we answer that, I'll share another quick tip, because the one you just gave is excellent, and that's actually a very similar approach to what I take. I go in, I sit down, or actually let's back up even before that. If you've never taken an AWS exam before, or if it's been a while, just as a quick refresher, you have to go in, you have to find a testing center near you. You go into that testing center and they're going to make you empty your pockets. You can't have cell phone. I had to take this watch off. They check your glasses, if you have glasses, to make sure you don't have smart glasses or something like that in. You can't have anything else in your ears, right? They make sure you're not taking anything in the exam center itself. But once you go in to the exam center, they'll give you either like that paper or scratch pad and a pencil or a dry erase marker. This depends on the exam center, at least where I live. I've been to like 3 or 4 different ones locally here, and there are 2 that I liked and 2 I did not like at all. The reason I didn't like the other 2 is because they did not give you any earplugs. And this is such a big deal for me. I literally call exam centers now and I'm like, do you provide earplugs or not? Because one time I sat down for an exam and it was another 3-hour long exam, and the guy sitting next to me in the cubicle next to me in the testing center, the entire exam was, when you're maybe focusing and you take your mouse and you like click and drag to select text. I know some people do that. Sometimes I do it too. But the entire exam, this guy's click, 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 click. I'm just hearing click, 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 click. I can't focus. I literally can't read the sentence right in front of me because this guy is driving me nuts. And he was there for 2 hours. So for 2 hours during my exam, I could not focus. And it was just a nightmare. So now
I
I'm
know
like,
exactly what you mean.
so
Yeah.
and that's just one thing. Other people will have other ticks or just like things they do that drive me nuts and that completely destroy my focus. So now I ask them beforehand, do you have earplugs? Can I use earplugs? And if they say yes, I get in there immediately. I put on my earplugs, block out all the noise that I can, and then I start just writing things down on the notepad, or I like create some organization. And then so that's one tip I would definitely add, because that's a big deal for me.
I had a similar experience in my Google Cloud Professional that I just did a couple of weeks ago. I was about 20 minutes into the exam, and somebody came in and sat down for another exam, and they had one of these mechanical keyboards, and they were tap 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 for about 10 minutes. I thought, this is never going to end. But luckily, it was just them setting up the account. Then the noise stopped, thankfully. And like you, Crystal, I just could not focus on the text of the exam, of the question. I just couldn't focus. All I could hear was this mechanical tap 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 tap.
It seems silly when you talk about it, but when you're there, there's nothing more frustrating. So yes, that's another tip. We'll share more tips along the way. That one popped in my head. I had to get it out. Okay, I think we're ready to dive into the first question.
I just want to. Shall I just kind of mention about my technique for taking notes before we go into this, or shall I do that after the questions?
Go for it.
So I found a really great technique for taking notes, finding information, and supplementing what I'm learning on training courses with content that I can find in other places. And I found a really good resource is to use ChatGPT to generate textbook style output for questions that I ask. For example, I would ask it like, I think there was a question about AWS firewall on the Q&A actually. So if I wanted to know about AWS firewall and I didn't have the content or the training session and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, what I would do is I would create a prompt for ChatGPT saying, please tell me about AWS firewall. Please make sure the output you give me is in like a textbook style format. And then what I'll do is I'll copy that and put it into a knowledge base, which I keep for revision. So for that, I use Confluence. I don't know if you're aware of the Atlassian Confluence application, but they're obviously you can use some kind of note taker or other like OneNote for Microsoft OneNote, something like that. But take that content, and if you're struggling to understand a concept or want more detail on it, just ask ChatGPT to explain it to you and output it in like textbook style, or even like a high school textbook, something like that. So it then will give you the correct detail, the structure of the output, and also the level of kind of detail that somebody who doesn't quite understand that concept will need to know to then get into and understand that concept better. And I found that invaluable. I've got a whole load for the Google Cloud one I did recently. I've got like a whole knowledge base of all the questions I ask, and comparing the Google Cloud service to AWS services so I could kind of understand it better and get the concept in my head. And I just basically copied and pasted everything it output into my knowledge base so I can then refer back to it.
Maybe in the next session or one of the other sessions, you'd be able to screen share that and share what you've got on there. I got to see it before we started here, and I love it. I love the organization of it. I love how simple it is as well. So maybe we can do that next time.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, we're about to get into the first practice exam question, I promise, but there was one more comment that just came through that I have to address in the Q&A section, which is saying, unfortunately, the online proctored exam doesn't allow you to write anything down or even read the question out loud, which makes it very difficult for me to concentrate sometimes. If you live in an area where you cannot find a physical proctored location, like a testing center or something like that, if you can't find that because of where you live, unfortunately, you're limited. You have to do online proctoring. But if you have the option, in my personal opinion, go to the physical testing center, go in person and do it there, because I've heard a lot of horror stories about doing online proctored. They're actually much stricter when you're doing online proctoring. You can't hold your face, right? Like if you're doing like this, they're like, oh, he's got something written on his hand. I'm ending your exam. You've got an automatic fail. Or if there's stuff in your room, like they'll make you pan around, you have to get everything out of the room. It's just from what I've heard, I've never actually done it myself, just I've heard so many stories that are just not good stories. So I would recommend not doing online proctoring if you have a physical testing center within an hour drive of you. It's worth the drive, in my opinion.
I've heard the same. In fact, even as far as what I like to do is I'll think and I'll look up above to the left or the right. And even that, they were told, they were asked, like, what are you looking at? What's there? What are you looking at? And you're like, you can't even look away from the screen during the whole time. It's just crazy. So I always go to a test center, always go to a test center. It's so much more convenient. It's takes that stress away from, getting halfway through and them saying, we're cancelling the exam, or afterwards they review the video footage and then decide they're going to cancel the exam. That would be a nightmare, especially if you passed, right, and you did all the content and there was nothing you feel was kind of compromising that exam, and then they cancel it because they didn't like you looking away for 2 seconds or something.
It sounds silly, but it's true. Okay, let's do this. Let's take a look at the first practice exam question. So the way that we're going to do this, a quick context, go ahead and read the question on here. If it's too small, let me know. If you're not able to read it, let me know. We can figure out another solution. But we're going to have the question first, then we're going to have the potential answers below that. And then I'm going to send out a poll, and that poll is going to have A, B, C, D or A, B, C, D, E. Go ahead and select what you think is the correct answer based on that letter. So take your time reading through this. There's no rush. We're not in any rush. Take your time reading through it. And then when you think you have the answer, go ahead and answer it. Let's try to answer in the next 60 seconds or so if we can. We got about 70% people responded. I'll wait to get closer to 100% or in the next 60 seconds. All right, let's go ahead and publish results and then we'll walk through it and see what's going on. Okay, so we had 35% of people responded with A as the correct answer. We had 11% saying B, then 47% saying C, and 4% saying D. Before we give should we start with the correct answer first and then explain, or should we explain a little bit, then correct answer? What do you think?
Let's go for the correct answer first, and then explain
Okay.
why the wrong answers are wrong.
So 11% of you got it right. The correct answer was B. So why is that? Maybe we should start by explaining what bastion hosts are, and then we can go into security groups versus NACLs, the process, and so on. Would you like to start with that, or should I start?
Yeah, you go ahead. I know you've
Okay.
written the notes for this one.
All right, sounds good. So when you're dealing with VPCs, right? The main point of a virtual private cloud is to be able to create this virtual private network where you can host resources and ideally completely hide those resources from the public internet. So if you have, say, web servers, if you have databases, caching servers, data servers, whatever it is that are not meant to be publicly accessible, they're meant to run private workloads and you're trying to hide them from the public world, you would put that in a VPC. But the problem and the challenge that that creates is because you're not making it accessible to the public world, you're also making it more difficult for your team members to be able to access those resources. So if they have to access the database, like to perform an update or change some of the data, whatever it is, whatever the use case, if they need to be able to access some of those resources within those virtual private clouds, they need a way to do that. In AWS, there's a few different ways to do that, but traditionally, people have used what's called a bastion host. And so a bastion host would probably be just an EC2 instance with certain, like a Linux operating system or something like that, and some special software on there that allows your team members to SSH, so to remotely connect to that EC2 instance, to that bastion host. And then from that bastion host, they can now access resources within the internal VPC. As a best practice, just in general, right? I have to share this. Bastion hosts are kind of losing favor. They're not necessarily the best way to do it nowadays. There's stuff like EC2 Instance Connect. You can use SSM. There's other AWS native services or even third-party services you can use nowadays that, in my opinion, and as the best practice, are going to be a little bit better than Bastion hosts. But Bastion hosts are still very popular because it was the way to do it for a very long time. A lot of organizations are using those. But typically, a bastion host is going to be located in its own subnet within a VPC. And that's a keyword right here, or a key couple of words, located in its own subnet within a VPC. Because it's an instance that's publicly exposed, that a lot of people can potentially have access to, you don't want it to be in the same subnet as your database or data servers or web servers or whatever else you have. You want it to be in a completely different subnet. You want to lock it down as much as you can. You want to give only SSH access to key personnel and so on and so forth. And so that's also why, if you don't know that, I also added that verbiage in the question to try to nudge towards that direction. And the reason that's important, the reason that matters is because when you're talking about security groups versus network access control lists, the NACLs or NACLs are going to be applied at the subnet level, versus security groups are going to be applied at the host level. So if we have this VPC with a subnet that has a Bastion host in it, typically you would have the Bastion host with the security group, and then you would have the NACL that's applied to the subnet that only has the Bastion host in it. The other reason that's important is because security groups are great, but they have one, we'll call it like a key weakness. It's not necessarily a weakness, it's just how it works, which is that they're stateful. What that means, and as I'm talking about this, I also want to pull up this presentation. Let me do this real quick. This is a fantastic presentation. I highly recommend that you go to it and spend some time watching it. It's actually fairly short. It's only about 30 minutes long, but this is very insightful for instance containment techniques for effective incident response by Jonathan Poling from, I think, a couple of years ago. Yeah, like 3 years ago. And so this talks about those key differences between NACLs, security groups, VPC level containment, and stuff like that. I'll leave this open for a bit if you want to pull this up on YouTube as I talk about the rest of this. But the reason that's important, the reason it's important that security groups are stateful is because since they're stateful, even if there's already an established connection, even if you go in and you modify a rule and you block access, because that connection is stateful and was already established, the threat actor, whoever is compromising your Bastion host, would not immediately get kicked out. They would still have access for potentially a few more minutes, even though you restricted it, even though you changed that rule in the security group. So whenever you can, because NACLs are stateless, which means that they don't track those connections, as soon as you modify the rule in the NACL, it will immediately kill that connection, even if they already had a prior connection established. As soon as you make that change, bam, it kills it. Because of that, preferably you would first change NACLs before you would change security groups when it comes to containment. The reason and the time or the scenarios when you may not be able to do that is if you have multiple resources within that subnet. So if you have, say you're running 10 web server instances in one single subnet, if you only have one instance that's been compromised or that you believe has been compromised, you wouldn't want to change the security group, because if you do that, you could impact production. If you block all traffic to that one security group and that one security group applies to all 10 instances, then you have an outage. You're impacting production. And so, I'm sorry, I meant to say NACLs. I got that. I apologize. I got that backwards. And so that's the instance when you wouldn't be able to do it at the NACL level, because if you change it at the NACL level, you're blocking the entire subnet. And so you might want to go in, and if you have, those 10 instances, but each of those instances have different security groups, then you'd be able to change it at the security group level and only affect that specific instance. I apologize. My brain and my mouth had a disconnect there. So that's why it's important to understand some of those key differences between the NACLs and the security groups. But that only helps us narrow it down to a couple of different options. That doesn't help us explain the other two options that have to do with stopping the Bastion host instance and then taking a snapshot, or changing the IAM roles. So we'll talk about that next. But are there any questions so far about what we just talked about here before I keep going? Change my answer. Nope,
Yeah.
wait. I mean, in the exam.
So let me ask one quick question though,
Yeah.
Christoph. So even if there are multiple hosts in that subnet, right? You still presumably just narrow down the IP address in your NACL rule and just put a specific IP address /32 in instead of the whole CIDR range.
Under, like, if you have a specific IP address that you think is compromising,
Yeah.
you could technically do that. Yeah, if you think that, like, if there's only one IP being used that seems to be the source of compromise, you could do that. I guess it really just does depend on the type of resource that it is. Like, if it's one of those resources where you can just spin up another one to replace it and prevent an outage, that's great. So the main goal a lot of times with organizations is, how do I respond to this incident without causing an outage? And so in that case, if you really need to, like, if an outage, even a 5-minute outage, would be critical and would cost you millions of dollars, then yeah, you should probably start with, let's go really fine grain with a tooth comb and try to do as small changes as possible. But if you have the luxury of just blocking all traffic to it, that is preferred, just because it's so easy to change your IP address. I mean, as soon as they get blocked, they might switch their VPN out, get a different IP address, and get right back in. And so then you're
Mhm.
just chasing IP addresses and trying to block those out. So it does really depend on the scenario, the resources impacted, and so on, for sure. Okay. So let's tackle that third option, which was stopping the Bastion host instance to prevent any more compromise, and then taking a snapshot of the instance and then transferring the snapshot to the dedicated digital forensics AWS account. That process is great. That's a great process to have. That gives you the ability to create a completely separate AWS account that's purely focused on digital forensics. Your security team has all the tools they need already pre-installed in that environment. It's completely isolated from the rest of your AWS accounts. That is a recommended best practice. If you go through this video here that I've got on the screen, he'll even talk about that and share information on that. The reason that's not the correct answer is, and you can definitely expect to see this type of tricky potential answer on the exam, is because the moment you stop the Bastion host instance, you can lose volatile data. So things that are stored as temporary files or things that are stored in memory. And so if you're truly trying to run digital forensics on that instance, the moment you stop it, you will lose some of that critical information. So typically you want to avoid stopping it until you've been able to go in and actually take a look, or like at least save and take a snapshot of that volatile data. Then you can move to the next steps. So ideally, you would first block access to it, but keep it running. Then you would proceed to the steps. Again, not always possible. And so it kind of depends on the scenario. Like that scenario is a little bit more vague by design to make it a little bit more difficult and to try to trick you. That's why I wrote it that way. But in the real exam, they might add some key pieces of information that would completely change this answer. That maybe they would add another sentence that would say something like, instead of just which of these steps is best to restrict access and prevent further compromise while allowing your security team to investigate. Maybe they would reword that and say something like, I don't know, um, the security team, or to, like, they're worried that the compromise is going to spread. They've already stopped the instance. Let's say that. Let's say that the question or says they've already stopped the instance. What are the next steps that you can take to investigate and see what's going on? In that case, I think that answer would probably actually be the best. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that potential answer. It's just not the best answer given what we know about the question in this case. Anything to add to that?
No, I think that's quite comprehensive.
Let's see the question options. Oh, yep, sorry. Let me switch back. So let's go back to this so you can see what I'm talking about. Thank you for asking that. Request you to please zoom out of your screen. Sorry, I'm not sure what that means. If you're not able to see, give me a thumbs down or raise hand or something like that.
I think that might be the person on the other end not having the format in the browser correct, maybe.
Yeah, if there's any issues, just write it in chat. That way I can try to correct, but hopefully everybody's able to see and follow along. Okay, so let's talk about that fourth potential option, which is change so this one right here, change the IAM roles associated with the Bastion host instance to restrict access based on the security team's role permissions. So because the Bastion host is an instance that's supposed to allow external access and it's potentially compromised, it's very possible that in this case, the compromise is not coming from within your AWS account. So even if you were to change IAM roles for that instance, unfortunately, that's just not really going to help in this situation, because if they found an SSH compromise, like maybe they stole an SSH key or they phished your employee, whatever they did to get external access to that Bastion host, even if it changed IAM roles, it's just not going to help you in that situation. Now, if we flip that scenario around and we change the scenario a little bit and we say something like, you've identified a potential compromise on one of your EC2 instances after initial research, your incident response team believes that an access key has been compromised and this user was assuming this role, and so this role's temporary credentials are assumed to be compromised as well, then in that case maybe that would make a little bit more sense. But when you're dealing with remote access in that has nothing to do with secret keys or assuming a role or anything of that nature, then unfortunately changing the IAM role is just not going to do anything for you.
I think one thing you might be able to do with that is just limit the blast radius of the compromise potentially.
And that's also one of the great parts of having that separate separate dedicated AWS account for digital forensics. You've got all the roles that are completely different. Different people can assume those roles. They don't have the same permissions. They don't have the same access. They require logging into a completely different set of users, and so on and so forth. So that's also another reason that that approach can be very beneficial if you're able to pull that off as an organization. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. If not, if we need more explanations, let me know in the questions. I'm going to take a second here to scroll through and see if there's anything I haven't addressed yet in the questions.
I'm just going to answer a couple of these about the recording, Christoph.
There was one question asking about the process, like if you restart the EC2, modify the instance or the security group, sorry, or another option if we don't want to use NACLs. There are organizations out there that don't want to use NACLs. They would rather just use security groups. So of course, in that case, if you have that policy and you're restricting access to even create NACL rules, then you're limited. You can't mess with NACLs. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But because this is an AWS certifications or certification, they assume that you're using everything they have to offer. And so unless they specifically tell you in the scenario that the organization is not using NACLs, then you would assume that they are using NACLs. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of restarting, I've already addressed the fact that you would lose some of that volatile data. If the scenario says that that doesn't matter, then that could be a very good option as well. There are many, many different approaches you can take to incident response. So as you try to study for this type of question, familiarize yourself with the scenarios, familiarize yourself with which order should I do what under which circumstances, and that will help you in this type of scenario.
Yeah, there's also a question about migrating these two instances to a honeypot network. Obviously, you won't be able to migrate between two networks with the EC2 instance still on. What you might be able to do if that's your intent, I don't know what you think of this, Christoph, but that's your intent to actually capture the activities of the bad guy. You could potentially set up traffic mirroring to another instance and just mirror all that traffic coming in and out of that one instance.
Yes, a honeypot is a good way to see if somebody's prodding at your networks, to see what techniques and procedures they're using. So yeah, that's a good approach. It's just typically when crap hits the fan like this, you already have access to what's going on. You already have maybe VPC flow logs that are feeding you that information. So you're not necessarily just trying to gather that for a future rainy day. At that point, you're just like, okay, there's a fire. Let's take care of that fire. Awesome. Great questions. Okay, cool. I think that's all I have to say about this one. Unless you have anything else to add, Roy, we can move on to the second one.
No, let's move on to the next one. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, also, once you get the slides, I've got the correct answer on the slide immediately after the question, as well as the explanation that talks a little bit more about what I mentioned today. But let's move on to question number 2. I'm going to time it this time. I'll give you 3 minutes starting now, and I'll pull up the poll. I'm adding another 60 seconds. So we got 60 seconds. Ten seconds. If you haven't answered yet, go ahead and answer. Take your best guess. We only have 50% answer rate. We can do better than that. Let's go. Just pick one, whatever you think is most likely. All right, let's go ahead and publish the results. So we had about 11% responded with A, 40% responded B, 11% responded C, 33% D, and 3% E. Three things I want to point out before I give the correct answer. First of all, you won't always get just 4 potential answers in AWS certification exams, especially specialty exams. You can get 5 potential answers, maybe even 6. I think the most I've ever seen is 6. I don't think I've seen beyond that. But sometimes they range it from 4 to 6 potential answers just to try and throw you off a little bit. There are also, you may have noticed, 2 very similar answers, but just with one keyword different. And then lastly, I'll point out the most, that's all capitalized. So what is the most likely reason? AWS loves to do this. Sometimes they'll put 2 to 3 potential answers that are possible. Technically, they're very possible, but which of them, given the scenario, is the most likely? And in this case, the correct answer would have been C. CloudTrail Lake was not configured to capture data events. So why is that the most likely reason? Roy, do you want to get started, or do you want me to take this one as well?
Yeah, go on. You've got
Okay.
you got the descriptions there.
Sounds good. To be fair, I did come up with these, so they're very familiar to me.
And just for everybody's benefit, when I read through these, when I first saw these answers, I did comment. I was looking at them on my phone. I didn't have my glasses on. I did comment that there were 2 answers the same here. So even people who have been through this and experienced with taking these exam questions can misread some of the content sometimes. So just bear that in mind. Be very careful about reading the answers.
Take your time going through it. I guess I can throw in a tip for this. The way that I do it usually is, as I'm going through the first pass around, I'll read the question and I'll look at the potential answers before I even try to respond, and I'll start eliminating. So let's do that in this case, right? We'll reread it, which says, after receiving an alert from GuardDuty Threat Detection regarding a potential threat involving an S3 bucket, you investigate using CloudTrail Lake. While reviewing the logs, you observe suspicious activity. So you confirm that there is something suspicious going on that's related to bucket operations, but you're not able to find any events. So you find no events indicating whether any objects have been accessed or modified. What is the most likely reason? Let's go ahead and remove E completely, because this has nothing to do with Athena. You can absolutely use Athena for incident response, for investigations. You can run very powerful queries against your event data, and you would be able to use it as an incident response tool. But in this case, we mentioned 2 or 3 services: S3, GuardDuty, CloudTrail. We did not mention anything to do with Athena. So in this case, I can just remove E fairly quickly. Then it gets a little bit more tricky, right? CloudTrail was properly configured, but did not have the right permissions through its service linked role to access S3 events. This question, I guess I could have worded it, or this answer I could have worded a little bit better, because if CloudTrail was properly configured, then it would have had the correct role. As you're going through and as you're configuring CloudTrail Lake, which here we specifically say that we're using CloudTrail Lake, as you're doing that, it would have told you access denied, not able to get the data, whatever. So as you're setting up the service, you would have seen that you're not capturing any data. You would have seen that something is wrong. You would have had to fix it before you could move on to your next task. So we could also go ahead and knock out D as a potential answer. In theory, right, that could be a real thing. But again, as you're setting up the service, you would have seen that it's not working. You would have received some access denied errors. You would have had to fix that before you could move on. So we're knocking out D and E. That leaves us with 3 potential answers. The first one potential being no data was likely downloaded or modified by the threat actor. If you're responding to an event and it has to do with an S3 bucket, you're pretty sure somebody compromised the S3 bucket, but you're just not seeing any events related to the data. The first thing I want you to think is not, well, they probably just didn't access it. We're good. Well, whew, we're safe. The bad guy didn't actually look at our data, even though they had complete access to the entire bucket. No, that's
And I've got a
that's
bridge to sell you.
yeah, like, I'm sorry, but that's very, very unlikely. That would be super odd. It's not impossible, but very, very unlikely. You have to assume the worst. You have to go in and you have to say, they probably did look at the data. Why am I not seeing those events? Which takes us to B and C as the potential answers. So in CloudTrail, and actually, as I'm answering this, I want to show you what I'm talking about. So let me stop screen sharing so I can get into my account really quickly. You probably wouldn't see anything valuable anyway, but just out of precaution. We'll go in my demo account. And I'll share my screen again. Let me know when you can see this.
Yeah, I can see it. It's fine.
So when you're in CloudTrail, you have different types of data events that you can configure. And in CloudTrail, even though it's quote unquote technically the same service, it's still the CloudTrail service. You have different features. So you have CloudTrail trails. And if you go to event history, you can see some of the events that are being collected by your trail. That's enabled by default. But you also have the Lake service feature. So when you go into Lake, and when you configure Lake, which is not configured by default because it has additional charges and so on, you have to go in and you have to configure Lake separately. When you do that, you have to create what's called an event data store. So let's actually create one, or I'll walk through the steps. I won't actually create it because I only have read-only access, but we'll pretend like we're creating an event data store. For you to be able to use CloudTrail Lake, that feature of CloudTrail, you have to first create an event data store. And that event data storage is different from your CloudTrail trail storage. CloudTrail trail storage. It's a tongue twister. So when you configure CloudTrail trails, they store data in S3. And technically speaking, you can go in here and you can create this event data store and you can ingest that data from the S3 bucket if you wanted to. But technically speaking, it's creating a totally separate data store event or data event storage. And so when you create this event data store and when you're choosing the events that you want to record, you can go in here and you can select between management events, which is the default, and data events. But data events is not enabled by default. The reason that matters to answer this question is because management events are going to be control plane events that only look at S3 bucket events. So in our case, going back to our scenario here, when we say, while reviewing the logs, you observe suspicious activity related to bucket operations. That's management events, but find no events indicating whether any objects have been accessed or modified. That's going to be your data events. So whoever configured CloudTrail Lake did not check this box, probably because they either didn't know about it or they wanted to save on costs because this does increase costs. As a result, the CloudTrail Lake event data store did not collect events that had to do with S3 object level API calls. You got a blind spot. You just can't see it. It literally just didn't collect it, which means that when you're querying your data in CloudTrail Lake, it's not going to be able to pull anything related to S3 object level operations, only S3 bucket level operations. That's a lot of tongue twisters today. This is testing my ability to
Glad
speak.
you're saying that, not me.
Yeah. Does that kind of make sense? Am I making sense here? Am I going too fast through it? Any questions on that?
No, it makes sense for me.
And yeah, like somebody commented, it's been a while since I set up CloudTrail trails. This is hard to remember because they're so similar, yet they operate very differently. So as you're studying CloudTrail, as you're getting ready for the domain related to incident response and all of that, keep this in mind. There's different types of CloudTrail events, and they can create blind spots. But again, you could copy trail events from your CloudTrail trail from S3 buckets. But again, as you create trails, you have the same option. So if you create a CloudTrail trail and you're not collecting data events and you try to copy the trail events like we see here, you're still going to have that blind spot. You're still not going to see data events unless you check that box, unless you make that API call and you configure it as such. So that's really, really important. Same thing with, I'll add, it's not really necessarily completely related to the question, but I'll also mention while we're at it, for management events specifically, you can select read and write. So if you come in here and you disable write, then you'll have that blind spot. You won't see write operations. Or if you exclude AWS KMS events, you won't see that. Same thing with RDS and so on. So something that's really important to keep in mind with CloudTrail.
We're coming up on time now, Christoph.
Okay. Thank you for the warning. That was basically it. Any questions on that?
So I provided my LinkedIn profile link in the Q&A. Christoph, I don't know if you want to do the same, just in case people didn't capture it from the slide. This is just a brief summary. This slide on Sky Purple Cloud. As I mentioned earlier, we're a UK-based cloud services company with global customers. We work in the UK, US, Europe, predominantly. Relatively new. We do a lot of cloud machine learning, cost optimization, as I mentioned, and security services. We also provide strategic cloud security and solution advice. So we don't just do the hands-on stuff. We can do the strategic advice to board and leadership level as well. We've designed and deployed multiple AI ML workflow solutions for predominantly in the life sciences industry, directly related to kind of research, biotech. And as I also mentioned earlier, we're an Orca security partner, which is allows us to kind of provide licenses and managed services for Orca, which is our cloud security posture management solution.
As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm with cyber.com. We do AWS cloud security training. We have content specific to this certification as well. And I was actually just pasting in the Q&A. If you need to refresh on CloudTrail and Trails, Lake, events, like management events, things like that, how to push notifications, all that good stuff, we have a free course that I think is an hour and a half, something like that. So it's really, really short. You can go through it for free. And it's on cyber.com/courses. It's called the Beginner's Guide to AWS CloudTrail, but that's just one example. We have many other courses and hands-on labs as well. So if you're interested in that, please check us out. And for connecting on LinkedIn, I've got my URL down there. We also have that QR code for Roy's LinkedIn, but I'd love to connect. I post weekly on there, all types of AWS security tips and tricks. I also share a bunch of cheat sheets. So let's connect and let's stay in touch. And if you have any questions, DM me. I'm happy to answer questions offline as well. So either through Discord or LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on both of those.
And yeah, so you'll find me on LinkedIn. So I'm on there nearly all the time.
Just to rehash, yes, we will be sharing the slides and the recording as well. Please give me about a day to get that going. So it will not be sent out in the next couple of hours. I know you're eager for it, but please give me some time and I will try my best to send it out tomorrow morning. If you don't receive it by midday tomorrow, feel free to DM me. Maybe it just went to spam and I'll be glad to send you direct links. But otherwise, it should be in your inbox by sometime tomorrow.
Cool.
Thanks everybody for attending. This was super fun, at least on my end. Hopefully it was fun for you too. And hopefully this helped you get a good sense for the types of questions you can expect, the types of topics, services, domains, things like that. But thank you for attending. And let's go back to that slide. The next session we'll have, just as a reminder, is going to be on July 24th. So what is that, like a couple weeks?
Yeah, that's on a Thursday, I think. The next one on a Wednesday, I think. Sorry, next one. Let's just check that. Yeah, that's Wednesday the 24th in 2 weeks' time.
But we'll see you in 2 weeks at the same time. Same, did you say Wednesday instead of Thursday this time?
Wednesday, yeah,
Okay.
Wednesday. Same time, but on Wednesday.
Same time on Wednesday on the 24th. You'll have to re-register. Don't forget, you have to re-register on that same page. I will update that form. It's not ready yet. Don't register for the current form. That's going to be the wrong one. I'll update that as soon as I can so we can get the next session ready to register for. Go ahead and register for that one, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christoph.
See you next time.